panels, we have heard from the first half thoroughly about the impact K-pop industry have on beauty standards that could hinder the progress of the feminist movement in this topic. But what is lacking in this debate is how the K-pop industry actually harms the feminist movement progress much more than the beauty standards. That is the objectifications of the idols, even more of the women in the industry itself. Not only OG haven't mentioned this factor, OG haven't explained on why opposing the K-pop industry will create an input for the feminist movement itself in the future. What is failing from the first half is the analysis of how the K-pop industry choose to market their products and how they work it, and how it hampered the goals of the feminist movement itself. Panels, we do need to address one of the vulnerable actors in this topic, none other than the K-pop industry, that the K-pop idols that work in the K-pop industry itself. The objectification of the K-pop idols that is very concerning, in which our team will explain in our substances. Now, before we move into our substances, I want to say one of my rebuttals to the opening opposition. So, the remarks the opening opposition have made is that K-pop industry is not only the place where beauty standards play an impact, that is while it is one of the main sources of why the beauty standards have played a big impact before. While we agree that the pressure of beauty standards came from many sources, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be just be focusing on all of them, right? So K-pop industry is one massive trend and have much of an impact right now that engage with various kind of consumers rather than the beauty pageant. Therefore, it will be justified to oppose it first and foremost. This is important to know just how the impact K-pop industry has on a broad range of consumers from all ages that create a more possibility for a new generation of women to have a harder self-acceptance in their own life. So this is exclusive because this kind of impact is only the K-pop impact that it has, right? The K-pop it reached to a very wide of society. Therefore, it is the potential main source of the self-acceptance problem for a broad range of generations. So, moving on into my substances, I will talk about what is the problem, what is the main problem that we're gonna discuss, and second, how by opposing the K-pop industry, it will benefit the feminist social movement. Moreover, in the South Korea itself. So let's talk about the problem that we're gonna discuss. First, I'm going to talk about the objectification and the exploitation of the K-pop idols itself. The marketing of K-pop idols nowadays is focusing much on the objectification of the visualization idols in form of physical albums, visual photo cards, and also note the fan services. This needs to be addressed, and we need to understand just how the K-pop industry forced the idols they have to fit into the standards the culture have set, and how they treat idol not as human being but rather as one of their products to fulfill the demand of the consumers, be it visuals or an act. This is the part where the exploitation takes places. This kind of thing is heavily happening in the K-pop industry in the form of where they tend to make the visual of the K-pop idols to be the main sell point of any products they have released. Not only it happens in the visualization of the products, but also in terms of fan service. That is that is also one of the main selling point of the K-pop industry itself. In form of act, they don't even want to do it in the first place. This also leads to the point where they don't have the enough time to rest, even to the point they haven't slept in days just to fulfill the inhumane contract and workload the industry has set them up to. Therefore, this exploits the value these idols have that the company is searching to the fullest, to the extent they must do something when they're not even they never want to do it in the first place, and it harms them physically and mentally. To the point even some have to be injured really bad first, where they can't walk or even having physiological problems, to eventually have the decent rest time they should have in the first place. So for example, of the visual is the overselling of the physical albums and over marketing of physical albums and photo cards that requires the idols to look a certain way. And also how about idols need to act in a certain way to create a fan service just to fulfill one demand of the consumers, be it acting cute or acting sexy outside of their will, and also the act of continuous show and dramas recording with inhuman schedule packed up in one day that leads to these idols to the lack of sleep. So by this reason, we managed to prove to you on how the K-pop industry itself doesn't see the idol as a human but as a moneymaker object that they exploited to the fullest. Now moving on to my second argument is that how this industry also promotes the non-consensual work. There are so much more fishy things that has happened in the K-pop industry before, correlating to the point of where to the point of view of the objectification happens to this idol because of the management or urgency that they have the tendency to treat the idols as the object, therefore making work contracts outside their consent. And yes, this has happened many times before, to the point the idol trainee who's not having strong will to be an idol quit their training because of the inhuman treatment, or even the idols that already have worked in this industry taking their own lives. These non-consensual works includes hidden sexual acts contract that is set up by the agency, and abusive treatment if one thing doesn't go right, and how it doesn't align with what the company wants. Consent. And why this is important for the feminists to be concerned about, because consent is one of the things the feminist movement have strongly fight about. Therefore, it needs to be addressed. And this is exclusively have happened countless of times in the Korea, not only in the K-pop industry but the Korea industry as a whole, that leads into the deaths of many Korean idols. For example, is the Boys Before Flower actress that has taken her life because of the non-consensual sex work, and dozens of cases that is hidden underneath the media that it surfaced through the anonymous portal of the South Korea. So by this reason, we managed to prove to you how non-consensual things happen in the industry and how it affects heavily on the K-pop idols. So next, we're going to talk about the benefits for the feminist movement by opposing K-pop industry, right? So as we know, this will create a progressive change of the movement itself in this South Korea itself. While we know that feminist movement in Korea is known to still have a very low progress because of the conservative and heavily misogynistic idealism it still holds compared to other nations. Like, take the change that we meant in the South Korea feminist movement could be some kind of more awareness of what the industry have done to the women, awareness of what this industry have done to women in general, and how to make the public in South Korea to understand that this is not okay, this is not normal. This needs to be addressed since the exploitation of the K-pop itself is still normalized by the public, it's still considered as okay, and they still haven't got any understanding why it is not okay. And this can only be done by the South Korea feminist movement because they know just how bad the situation inside their country. They have the first-hand look and investigation into the K-pop industry geographically, and how the people of South Korea would only listen first to their own civilians, and also the movement and how this movement also have the most main goals in it, and how they focus on it. So by this reason, we managed to prove to you on how by opposing this, it could create a massive and progressive change of the South Korea feminist movement that is still heavy with conservative and misogynistic idealism. And with this reason, we are proud to propose.
Okay. Setting up a timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panels, what I've been observing in this debate, that in the opening half of this debate, it has been mainly talking about whether the current beauty standards that results in the K-pop influence is justified or not. But we say that this should not be what the debate is all about, right? And this is like first we want to tackle on like what is the mishaps that as OG has brought in this debate, and why we will come stronger as a team when it comes to the government bench of the House. So first, let's try to talk about what is lacking about what is in OG's case. So because of the direction of the OG's approach of case, it became a push and pull analysis on like which standards are like acceptable or not in the current society. And although like it can be like a form of like something that the feminist movement can fight on, but you should not be what this debate is about. Because what should this debate be about is actually on the actual harms that materialize on the most vulnerable actors, right? Which is the one, and we are the only team that has been identifying this in this debate. So like their failure to identify the most vulnerable actors, it means that this team doesn't really see on like who are the people that are directly impacted on what are these beauty standards, what these beauty standards are being most affected to, right? Because it is actually the women in the working industry itself, right? Because like the harms in their case isn't totally exclusive, right? It depends on like where you live, but at least in our case, it's exclusive because we're talking about the ones that are directly impacted by the K-pop industry, not impacted by the trends that are brought by this K-pop talk, right? And thus there's no like identification on like which feminist movement like they're talking about, and it's also like a problem, right? Because this doesn't it means that it doesn't show which which is the topic that the feminist movement should be mostly practicing about, and we're the team that has identified that it's talking about like the feminist movement in South Korea, right? It means that it has identified on why this is the something that is should be like the most urgent as compared to the other forms of beauty agency like beauty pageant that has been like most exploitative, right? And this is the only explanation that comes from CG. Now, before I move on, let's talk about the case that OOS brought. Why like the case that OOS brought is mainly it's like we say that they've taken the wrong approach, and thus their case should be dismissed from this entire debate, because like their entire idea is contingent on like first, like why opposing is not matter. Because by simply taking the surface level justification that they have brought, like defending the K-pop industry, like saying they need money, and then there's various minor benefits that we don't actually oppose. But they're ignoring the various grievances and problems caused by the K-pop industry, and we see them as, and they see the bigger problems as not significant, right? And this is like why we say that the feminist movement should oppose. And one of the defense of their premise is like saying by, oh, K-pop isn't the only culprit, there are other industries. Meaning you say it's okay to dismiss one of the sources of the problem, right? Because it means there are other identical sources of problems as well. However, the source of problem does have some kind of different benefit because they create new trends and source from a minority. Thus, this benefit should not be even considered because of how dismissive they are of the current underlying problem, which makes it impossible for feminist movement to ignore due to their responsibility, right? But let's dismiss their case even further, right? Like let's say the various good images the K-pop industry being, the showcase culture, blah blah blah, minority can succeed. Like first, it's not a justification, right? Because it's a controlled narrative that the K-pop industry wants to project, right? Like every single good propaganda, and this is irrelevant to the feminist movement because it's not the focus of the group. Like sure, these are good things to promote, but this is not what the main problems that the feminist movement are trying to address. This is just another way for them to shift the narrative. And then they talk about the demand justify the means of supply. And first, like say no, because like the supply still needs to be justified, right? Because if it's based on exploitative means, it means that this demand will eventually dwindle, right? Based on the public's perception, if they see how these demands are actually how the supply is being created, like by exposing like that this thing is something unethical, like this demand will like eventually go down, right? Because of the fact that these things are like so unethical. Then like the feminist movement is like seen as a bad influence, like something very illogical. Because like first there's no step-by-step analysis on how the K-pop movement is able to sway away the public opinion because the feminist movement is bad. Like even though it's still illogical and impossible because like feminist resistance is objectively based on something that's justified, right? Which is fighting oppression. And sure, there's like haters, and maybe they can persuade more haters by saying this narrative. But like the feminist movement right now, like even right now they're not afraid for haters because they know they're fighting for the right thing, right? So ultimately we say it will be still ultimately be better for the feminist movement in actually their entire purpose because of the two important points that she just brought to this debate, and why CG should be the team that is the most impactful in this debate. Because first we identified the objectification of women, right? And especially the objectification of the women that has been directly affected by this motion. Like we identified the standards that are being imposed on these women, whether in form of the more blatant requirement of body weight, skin color, height, to the more implicit requirement, right, of the actual work that you need to make it big, right? Make it big in the industry. And though, like from our analysis of objectification, it's more important because we actually talk about the direct victims of this objectification, right? Which is the women working in the industry, who is forced to the various subjects of the metrics and standards. Because at least in the opening part, like we say it's not exclusive right before, but in our case, it's like they're the one that is having their livelihood contingent on this. Thus, this is like if they don't follow the standards, not the harm that materialize. It's not only about like social dismissal or like social shaming, but it's also a loss of their ability to like make a living, right, and feed their family and like sustain their life. And secondly, what's most important is like the harms that these women experience. This standard of objectification not only forces these women to subject themselves from the pressure from within, but also force the industry to pursue unethical means to these women. And this is the most problematic, distinguished problematic of the K-pop industry, right? Because this shows that the harm that the feminist movement based on South Korea, right? This sets apart from the Western industry, because even though there's like still indeed exploitation in like the other industries, like the Western industry maybe like exploiting the young kids, but what is the two things that we need to identify is first, like this K-pop industry is like based in like a country where like there's still an urgent address to break the status quo, right? The status quo is the fact that there's still an indifference there's still an indifference within this kind of culture, because like the cancel culture is not able to take place because of like how the different the culture is right now. It's not liberalism, it's something that is not as prevalent in the industry. And what's most secondly importantly is like this K-pop industry is something that is new and rapidly developing, right? So there's still a minimal lack amount of accountability, and this is the accountability that will be brought by the feminist movement, right? And because like as every new and every new and rapidly developing industry with a very high demand, they want to make sure as much output as possible. So they don't really give a care. They don't really care on whether how will they be able to achieve. I mean, they don't care if their workers will suicide, or they don't care if like they like try to exploit, whether through like giving them cutthroat competitions and make them fight against each other, and then try to subject them to various abuses. And this is like why we CG has brought the most explosive harms by the K-pop industry. Proud to oppose.